Hello, Steve Smith here, and I'd like to tell you about the new edition of the Language Teacher Toolkit by myself and my fellow writer Gianfranco Conti. The first edition in 2016 is now 7 years old, and we thought it was time to do a serious update. So this is what I would call definitely a heavily revised edition. Probably much more heavily revised than I originally intended as I worked on this through 2022 and early into this year. By the way, you might be interested in the way that we work. Because I'm the lead author on this particular book, what I do is I write material, I send it to Gianfranco, who has a look, makes comments, feeds back to me, and then we produce the final text. And then quite late in the process, my wife, who is the editor, then looks through the text with a fine-tooth comb again several times to make sure that we've eliminated any possible inaccuracies or things that aren't clear. So what's different about the new book? Well, as I say, it's definitely a heavily revised version of the original. The recipe is still essentially the same. It's a handbook for all teachers, both beginning teachers, pre-service teachers, and teachers with more experience. Mainly those working in the secondary or high school field. We have a mixture of research evidence because that's something that both Gianfranco and I are very interested in and always have been interested in. So you'll find it's a good introduction to second language acquisition theory as well as cognitive science theory. But the main emphasis is still on the nuts and bolts of the classroom, ideas for developing good, effective lessons, both from our experience and what we've learned from other teachers and from our reading. So what's different about this new edition? Well, it's actually so different that we almost renamed the book, but we decided to keep the brand, the Language Teacher Toolkit. But there are many changes which I'll just briefly enumerate now. To start with, we had to remove some material to make space for all the new stuff. So we got rid of the chapter on behavior management. We also got rid of the section at the end of the book which had example lesson resources. And this space was then replaced by some new chapters. So, for example, we have a chapter on fluency, which didn't exist in the first book. We have a chapter on lesson planning, which we thought was somewhat absent, the actual nitty-gritty of planning lessons. We have a new chapter on curriculum planning, particularly including reference to writers such as Paul Nation, and we look at his 4 strands model, for example, of curriculum planning. We have developed the chapters on motivation to include more up-to-date information about self-efficacy. And we have improved the chapter, I think, on cultural understanding or intercultural competence, as it's sometimes called, to reflect the greater interest in issues like inclusivity and diversity in recent years and what's sometimes called culturally responsive teaching. So that's something relatively new in the book. We've reordered the chapters to put listening first and developed the chapter on listening considerably. Probably the most significant change in the book is that we included a new chapter on lexicogrammar and Gianfranco's EPI methodology, extensive processing instruction. This was really prompted by me because it struck me that because this methodology has become so popular in classrooms, particularly in the UK, in England, also in Australia, but in other countries as well, that because this hadn't really been dealt with in much detail at all in the first book, it needed more attention in this book to reflect what's actually happening in classrooms. So although it's not a detailed introduction into Gianfranco's methodology, you'll find that really in the book, Breaking the Sound Barrier, Teaching Language Learners How to Listen, and in Gianfranco's blogs, of course. But there is an introduction into lexicogrammar, the theoretical basis behind EPI, and a brief summary of EPI as well. So that's new as well. We updated lots of the references and removed old references which we no longer wanted to include. But the book is still quite heavy, I would say, on research references. Now, there's a difficult line to tread for us as writers here because we know that not every teacher is interested in research, but it reflects what Gianfranco and I are interested in. And I think for those teachers who didn't get that sort of grounding in their training, they'll find that this book does provide a good introduction to the main sort of theories of second language learning methods and principles of acquisition such as comprehensible input, interaction, output, and so on. We also have developed, partly based on the work we did on the book called Memory, we've developed the themes of cognitive science. So these include issues such as cognitive load theory, working memory, the spacing effect, forgetting, dual coding theory. These are the sorts of things that are much discussed, particularly in British educational circles. I think rather less so amongst American language teachers. So I think if you're a reader from the United States, and we do have a lot of readers from North America, you might find some of that material interesting and perhaps quite novel to some extent. So a lot of rewriting has gone into this book. I think the chapters are more coherent. We've made a clearer distinction between research and practice. So most chapters begin with a section on research, where the main points are listed as bullet points to start each chapter, and then the second part of each chapter has classroom practice. This doesn't really work for every chapter, but we've done our best to make it as clear as possible. So I'm pretty proud of this book, actually. I think it's one that will be hopefully standard reading for teachers in training, and I expect you'll enjoy it. Well, I hope so anyway. So thank you for listening.